And here we go. Oh, good. Liz Garst is here. Haven't seen you in a while, Liz. All right. So nice to have a full house for our guest today. Laura Bellin. You'll like Laura, Tim. She covers Iowa politics. Oh, and here's Kathy Obranovich, your state's newsroom colleague here in Iowa. So glad.
Uh-oh. I'll try not to
Yeah.
embarrass.
Yeah, I think she'll give me a pass. So, all right, I will be multitasking, letting people in, but let's go ahead and get this party started. So glad to have Tim Carpenter on our call today. Based on Tim Carpenter's reporting and other published accounts, Zach Lahn moved to Kansas primarily for work and professional opportunities after growing up in Northwest Iowa. He spent a lot of his adult life in the Wichita area, where he became involved in politics, nonprofit fundraising, education, and business ventures. So it is very fortuitous that we have an opportunity to talk to Tim Carpenter. He is with digital publication similar to Iowa Capital Dispatch. It's part of the same state's newsroom group network. He's one of the Midwest's most respected state house and political reporters, with roughly 4 decades of experience covering Kansas government, elections, public policy, and politics. He's currently a senior reporter and founding member of the nonprofit news organization, the Kansas Reflector. And a few highlights from his career before we get started talking to Tim. He covered Kansas politics and government for nearly 40 years. He worked for United Press International, the Lawrence Journal World, Topeka Capital Journal, and now the Kansas Reflector. So, Tim, welcome to this podcast. And if you would, please tell us what you can about what Iowans need to know about Zach Lahn based on your reporting.
Well, thanks. It's good to be with you. There's a lot to talk about in terms of any candidate for governor, but I think the thing that interested me from Kansas was how much I thought Zach Lahn could have been a candidate for governor in Kansas. He had been down here, he understood something about Kansas, and maybe he just saw a better opportunity up in Iowa because there's a very crowded field in Kansas. We have a 2-term Democratic governor, Laura Kelly, who can't run again. And so it's a wide open seat. And so we have a competitive Democratic primary and a quite competitive Republican primary for governor. And so maybe Mr. Lahn thought his odds were better up in Iowa. And so I actually, for a long time, didn't know anything about his Kansas connection. So shortly before the primary, 2 weeks or so before, I started trying to figure out how to write a story about it. And we did manage to get it done. I wish it had been done earlier and that we perhaps had a little bit more time to develop it. But it's relevant for primary voters, I think, so we got it out there. And now, since he won the nomination, people can really dive into his background and do a thorough job of vetting him. So he's kind of an interesting guy. He wants to be an outsider. He claims he's a political outsider, but he spent most of his life as a political insider, working for campaigns, Colorado and Montana, I think, and then also for Americans for Prosperity, which is a pretty influential political organization. It's in Kansas and Iowa and elsewhere, and which is very importantly connected to Charles Koch and the Koch fund, the mega billionaire, one of the richest men in America, and Americans for Prosperity just dumps an avalanche of mailers in people's mailboxes in Kansas elections. Koch Industries is based in Wichita, Kansas, so they have a very outsized influence here. And Mr. Lahn married into the Koch family, the Koch political family of sorts. And I think part of his capability in terms of being a politician in Iowa comes from the resources that were available through that way.
Tim,
So I can
oh,
continue to blab, but I'd rather you guys ask questions.
well, I've got a number of people on the call who are also members of the Iowa Writers Collaborative. I'm going to bring them into the conversation. But what kind of reaction did you get locally from your story about Tim Lahn? Did you have much reaction?
So in Kansas, not so much because I really think people were focused on Kansas and trying to, that we had a filing deadline right around when you had your primary. So our primary isn't until August. So there's really people invested in trying to figure out who these candidates are in Kansas. And as you know, sometimes people don't start thumbing through their index cards on what candidates are what until, oh gosh, I got to go vote tomorrow. So, but we're starting to have a lot more ads down here. So I really think the attention was there, and we have a very interesting U.S. Senate race down here that would have occupied people's minds rather than what the heck is going on in Iowa.
Okay,
So I don't really know what impact any of that coverage had in Iowa either.
okay, well, you might get a sense of that when we start going around the room here and bring people in. Chuck Offenberger, do you want to lead the parade here?
Uh, hey Tim, thanks for joining us today. It's
Sure.
fascinating to have you on here and have this perspective about our new Kansan running for governor of Iowa. Um, the I'm tempted to start off this question. I start off just by saying, "What's the matter with Kansas?" Isn't that what you're supposed to ask journalists from Kansas?
Yeah, it's a very
Um,
famous book. People largely voting against their own self-interest. I think is kind of what that's about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I recall I've been around long enough that I remember when your governor Sam Brownback came up here. It was governor, wasn't it?
You certainly what United States senator and then governor,
Yeah, and then he
and
came up and was running for president up here, and he really, when he ran, he wasn't my candidate, but he certainly seemed to be a young guy with a bright political future, and then he didn't go anywhere in that cycle up here, which is not unusual. And then he went back, and we started hearing stories in Iowa about what we were hearing called the Kansasification. We began to be worried about the Kansasification of Iowa because of what Brownback and his Republican allies down there had done, particularly to public education in Kansas. And then, God Almighty, it seemed to happen here. Was Zach Lane, where was he at that point? How was he involved in the Brownback years in Kansas?
so I don't think he was very involved at all. I think he was off in Montana trying to undermine Obamacare and things like that in Montana before he came back to Iowa. Like I think he bought that the farm, at least part of the farm that was in the family up there in 2014, but he moved to Wichita in around 2018. So Brownback was elected United States Senator and was elected governor in 2010. And he promptly wanted to prove his bona fides as a presidential candidate. So he started reforming government. He tried to basically repeal anything FDR like and, government assistance. And they cut about $1 billion a year from the income tax and it bankrupted the state. And so for 5 years, they stole from the Kansas Department of Transportation and just anywhere. They're very clever about finding cash buried under the Capitol until the Republicans and Democrats basically repealed his tax program in 2017. He Arthur Laffer drew this out on a napkin for him, how this was all going to work. You cut income taxes and businesses invest, the Laffer curve and all that. And it didn't work. It didn't work at that scale. All it did was bankrupt, and as you say, public education. They stripped cash out of public schools and highways and every means available. And basically, he left Kansas with his tail between his legs when he resigned a year before the end of his second term and became the U.S. ambassador for international religious freedom for Donald Trump in the first term.
Wow. And thus another thing that happened as a result of that is a two-term Democratic governor, right?
Yeah, she ran against Sam Brownback, even though her opponent was Chris Kobach the first time. And then she ran for reelection, and then Kobach was later elected Attorney General. But then in her reelection, she ran against Brownback again in 2022 against Derek Schmidt, who subsequently was elected to Congress. These are like prominent political figures, but she ran against Sam Brownback
But
successfully.
but one more question, Tim. We can't up here in Iowa as we're trying to figure out Zach Lane now at this point. We can't tie him to that Brownback collapse.
I don't think so, unless he would share with you insights into the fact that he supported Brownback or those initiatives about cutting income taxes and the Laffer curve and all that. I think it's a cautionary tale for many states. You better be careful about how much you push your state off a income tax cliff. Uh, what happened was they cut tax revenues so much, but they didn't cut spending, and that created the problem. You've got to have, if you're going to cut taxes and get patted on the back, you got to have the courage to cut spending.
Well, it's been fascinating to watch that, and thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to introduce you, Tim, to Dave Price, who is a member of the Iowa Writers Collaborative, and he leads the Iowa Down Ballot podcast we have as a part of this collaborative. Also included in that podcast are Kathy Abradovich, who's on the call today, and Kathy, I'd like to bring you in a minute, and Laura Bellin, you too. But Dave, why don't you start? Do you have a question or comment?
A couple of things that, Democrats have tried to stick Lahn with carpetbagger, and it just reminds me that Democrats over the years have had a couple of candidates. Mike Franken, who ran for the United States Senate, moved back not all that long before he ran for the United States Senate. And I remember way back in the day when Christy Vilsack ran for Congress, she had not been living in the district, which is not a requirement. And we have a member of Congress right now in Iowa who does not live in her congressional district. But I'm curious, with your reporting, have you seen anything to substantiate any kind of whether Lahn was truly thinking about running in Kansas versus running in Iowa? As you know, he says that he's been working on his grandparents' farmstead for a long time after they own the property, and they've clearly done a lot of work. I've been out there to kind of refurbish it. I forget how old it is, but it's super old. And as he had his former endeavors in Wichita and then started doing some other things in Belle Plaine. But I'm curious if you've seen anything did he do any kind of outreach or anything like that looking in Kansas politics, or is that just speculation because he had been there and because of his connections?
My sense is that he kept a pretty low profile down in Wichita other than being one of the organizational founders of this school called the Wonder School. It's a pre-K to high school, $10,000 a year's tuition, totally funded by the Koch family, basically. It's on the Wichita State University campus where the Kochs have a big presence. And the Chase Koch, Charles Koch's son, and his wife at that time, Annie, brought Lahn down there to kind of organize and run this school. I guess because of they trusted him because he had such a presence in Americans for Prosperity. And I think that had to be the connecting the dots. And so he went down there and ran the school, and then became Chase and Annie Koch got divorced. Lahn got divorced. Mrs. Koch and Lahn married each other, and now they have the blended family, which led to him flying down there in his aircraft. But I have to believe, too, that a lot of the resources he has to manage this campaign, loaning himself his campaign $2 million, for example, has to be part of this Koch empire. So I don't know if he got in business, got super wealthy. I read somewhere that he was in business to the tune of about $1 million with somebody who had a sex toy company. I find that fascinating. Maybe that's way more profitable than I ever imagined. But I don't know that he raised his head politically in Kansas and expressed interest in Kansas Republican politics as a potential candidate. Because if he did, you would have heard about him running for, Sedgwick County Commission or Wichita City Council or the state legislature or something like that. He did vote in Kansas in 2018, 2020, and 2022, and he moved up to Iowa in 2023 and registered in 2024 up there in October, just before the deadline that he needed to do to run for governor. So at some point he decided Iowa is the place to go, and I'm not going to run from Kansas, because maybe he could make the argument that he's more of an Iowan than he is a Kansan because he grew up there and so forth. And he very much emphasizes he's a sixth generation Iowan. And you see,
and it would be fascinating if he was thinking about governor back then, because at that point, Kim Reynolds was running for re-election. So that would have put him in a bizarre situation to take on a long-term governor if he was thinking about it at the time. There were no indications back then that Kim Reynolds would not run again. So that would be
Correct.
striking if he was really doing
Maybe
it
he
that
was
early on.
just, maybe this thing evolved and he goes, I'm in, and hustled up there and just thought, or maybe he was just really going to have his family live in Iowa. It could be just less conspiratorial than that, and just things fell into place. I think he's a wealthy person. I think when I watch the debate and his ads, I think he's very well spoken on the campaign trail. He's very organized in his thoughts. I think he's persuasive. I think he's a good politician in terms of talking the talk. He doesn't, of course, have any government experience. He doesn't know necessarily what it's like to have the Republican legislature stab him in the back, and how do you deal with that?
Okay, thanks, Dave, and feel free to let me know if you want to come back on the call. Kathy Obradovich, welcome to the podcast. You're affiliated with the organization that Tim writes for in Kansas. So, do you have a comment or question?
Yeah, so first of all, hi, Tim. Great to
Hello.
see you. Tim and I actually met in person for the first time a couple of weeks ago. There was a States Newsroom editors meeting in St. Louis, and several of the Kansas Reflector staff came over, as well as the Missouri Independent. So, I think, first of all, just a pitch for Tim and his organization. They are very strong newsroom down in Kansas. You can, take a look at their website at kansasreflector.com. Subscribe to their newsletter. It's all free, but that it just gives you a little broader story. And I look every week. At the Kansas Reflector, in addition to all the other Midwest and states newsrooms, and it's amazing how many of the issues are going on at the same time. I was interested in Chuck's line of questioning, because I do think that Iowa is headed right down the same path as Kansas. We've cut taxes to the point where we're in functional deficits. We're living off reserve funds, and I can see this headed in that same direction. And Republicans knew it at the time. They were being told over and over again that even cutting taxes like this, Iowa's not going to be competitive enough to get the revenue boom that you were expecting. So I thought that was really interesting. One question for you, Tim. Because I'm really intrigued by the Koch brothers' involvement and to what extent they're involved in the campaign, in part because Zach Lane has made a point of campaigning against big ag, blaming them actually for Iowa's water pollution and high cancer rates. And of course, we know that the Koch Industries is all about big ag and all about nitrogen fertilizer. And I have to wonder, are they somehow backing off of that position somehow, or are they just choosing to ignore that Zach Lane is actually campaigning against their actual business? I just don't understand how that works for him.
Yeah, a lot to say there. I get the feeling that Charles Koch could care less who the governor of Iowa is. You're not going to stop I think Bloomberg says he's worth $71 billion. So I just top 25 richest persons in the world. So whatever, something like that. So I don't know. See, I'm just thinking about this stuff. He took Charles Koch's niece and took her to Iowa. I don't know if there's a fractured relationship between Koch Industries and Charles Koch and Mr. Lane. Possibly there is. And in terms of this ag thing, Koch Industries is about energy, fertilizers, paper, finance, chemicals, plastics, and all that stuff. And so they have a huge interest in how much chemicals that Iowa farmers are dumping on the soil and leaching into the water. I don't know if Lane is going to bail on this very unusual and aggressive policy line in the general election. He might, but claiming he's going to break up the ag monopolies sounds like a socialist to me, and it doesn't seem like that's going to work in Iowa general elections. I mean, it's a very radical and interesting thing to say, and really separates him from others. The cancer issue he's talked about is legitimate, and I think there's farmers out there that are keeling over from the chemicals and the pesticides they put on the in their crops for decades. I wonder whether Finstra, as I'm saying that right? I mean, he barely lost, right? But did Donald Trump's endorsement of him hurt him or help him? Did it help Lane that he wasn't endorsed by Trump? And Finstra appears to have ran a horrible campaign. I mean, if he's not going to participate in debates and get out there and slug it out with these guys, then if he's lost by less than a percentage point, he deserves his fate. So I just don't know what the general election is going to be and how far away from the Coke industries Lane is going to be by the end of this campaign. Sometimes these people pivot pretty hard. The Charles Koch has been interesting because he doesn't like corporate welfare, but he has Koch people. They've sent people in the Capitol to work on criminal justice issues, and he's pro pot, recreational weed. So he's very much a libertarian. So that kind of explains that. But you can't work for Americans' prosperity, a totally Koch organized organization, and not believe some of the principles about small government and all that. I mean, you can't spend years preaching that gospel in political circles and not believe some of that. So I don't really know exactly who Mr. Lane is. Somebody needs to figure that out. The connection down here is the school and his family and so forth. So we'll see how much there's no way the Kochs are going to go into Iowa and try to ruin his campaign, I don't think. But it's a fascinating dynamic. He's way more interesting than our candidates for governor in Kansas.
Well, you're welcome to cover him up here. I'm going to keep going through our roster here of members of the Iowa Writers Collaborative, and then open up to other readers. Liz Garst, I want to be sure and get you involved in this conversation. Abena Sankofa Imhotep, would you like to go next?
I would. Thank you, Julie. Hi, everybody. Tim, welcome.
Hi.
I'm so confused by Zach Lane. I don't even know where to start. But I'll start here. So he recently put out an attack ad against Rob Sand. It's been all over the news. Really interesting to see these ads. 'Tis the season. At the end of the commercial, there's a clip of Rob Sand eating pizza, talking about there's too much pizza in my mouth to answer the question. That was actually on my podcast. I had Rob on as a guest, and I surprised him with Casey's Pizza. So I was
way to go,
right? We made it. So hi, Mom. I was pretty surprised to see that as a clip on there, but way out of context. I was actually asking Rob Sand if he was considering a run for governor. And then he ate the pizza and said, I've got too much pizza in my mouth. But anyway, back to Zach Lane. What would have to be true for you to consider Zach Lane's residency, his Kansas residency, a major issue worth sustained coverage? Because I think we've got like 2 weeks in the news cycle without the Writers Collaborative, at least. If we rely on everybody else, it's got 2 weeks max, and then we're moving on. So what needs to be true in order for that to remain a story and an issue?
Yeah, it would have to be, I think legally he's met the metrics that he needs to be a resident of Iowa and a candidate for governor and to serve in the office. My problem is that if somebody moved from Michigan into Kansas shortly before the filing deadline because he saw a less expensive race. You can run for Congress in Kansas for $500,000, $1 million. Try that in New York City. So people come from elsewhere, and it's been done in Kansas, and they haven't fared well. These super rich candidates without government experience. I just want the person personally to know more about Iowa, more about the legislature and all the issues that encompasses. And if I was an Iowa voter, I'd view with skepticism a late arrival, not to punish people who haven't been here for 30 years, but somebody like this, I would just be very skeptical of. But and that would be whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. And it's really up to Iowa to decide whether they believe in the principles that Lahn espouses and is really going to carry through on this. Some of it seems pretty far-fetched. He's not going to break up corporate monopolies in agriculture. Agriculture is king in Iowa, much as it is in Kansas. And if you think you're going to crack John Deere or something like that in Kansas, you've lost your mind. I do think one of the things that farmers can think about and farmer voters is the effort in Iowa and Kansas to provide legal exemptions for these chemical companies so that they can't be sued for poisoning people. I think that's a very, very dangerous piece of legislation. I think Lahn is against such a thing in Iowa. So if he speaks Iowa, if he sounds Iowa, if he commits to Iowa, I think some of this won't matter as much. But I think, I think about my parents. I grew up in Missouri, and I grew up on a farm, dairy farm, and a beef cattle farm in Missouri. And I think, somebody could have moved there 25 years ago, and they'd still be the new guy down the street, down the road. So I think that for me as a voter, just that lack of connection to the state would be problematic. And some people will get over that hurdle quite easily, maybe just based on simple partisanship. But others are going to get stuck on it. And it's really whether or not you can jump to the other party. Some people might just stay home, just not vote. But really, it should come down to the issues. I think you've got two very wealthy candidates here. And so this first round of attack ads, that's just the beginning of the pain you guys are going to suffer. So
You got that
Thanks.
right. All right,
Appreciate
Laura
ya.
Bellin, let's go to you next. Thanks, Abana.
Hi, thanks for being here. I wanted to clarify because you were talking about whether Zach Lahn may have been thinking about running for governor. I'm trying to independently confirm this, but Zachary Orrin Smith, who's a political reporter for Iowa Starting Line, he had a source who spoke with Ashley Hinson after the primary. And the source says, I asked her about Lahn. She said she was surprised. She's only ever spoken to him once a year ago when he apparently wanted to run for Congress. So I think there have long been rumors that Ashley Hinson, who represents Northeast Iowa in the U.S. House, was thinking about running for Senate. And Lahn's family farm is in that district. So I doubt he was ever thinking about running for governor against Kim Reynolds in the Republican primary, but he may have been looking at possibly an open seat for Congress in Northeast Iowa, and that was why he established his residency initially for that. But in any case, I wanted
makes
to
a lot
know
of
more
sense.
about what? Yeah, I wanted
Makes
to
a
know
lot
more
of sense.
about this school, this Wonder School, because I've been to a few Zach Lahn events, and the way he talks about it, it's like very innovative, and it's based on, they don't just advance people to the next grade based on age. It's based on mastery of the skills. And I was just wondering if you can tell us anything about the reputation of that school. I understand it's fairly small, right? About 70 students or so. And what kind of, do people know anything about the teaching methods? Is it a school that's hard for people to get into, or is it more like they'd like to have more students, but there hasn't been much interest? So I'd like to hear more about that Wonder School, if you can tell us anything.
Well, we're sort of at a informational deficit because they don't want to answer phone calls or contact, and the school's not in session as far as I know when I last checked. And so it's just hard to just knock on the door and go check it out. You'd think they would be more open to that kind of coverage, but it's they say things online like, and in news stories, it's led by students. They have a thing in the morning where they sit around and have kind of a debate, and students are teaching younger students. It makes me think about a Montessori school a little bit, less of the public school model. And he does brag about how innovative it is. I'm really not sure how involved he is in the school at the moment. Certainly, if he's running for governor of Iowa and being a business fat cat and a farmer, I'd like to know how much farming he really does. There's an ad I saw where he's in a combine, and these combines these days are technological enough that they'll drive by themselves. So I'm really not sure if he was really steering that thing or not. Uh, and so I don't know how much contact he has in Kansas other than his children when he zips down to see them. But the school is, to me, unknown to me. I think there's stories have been written about it in the past in Wichita because it was unique and unusual, and Koch rented out an unused building on the Wichita State University campus and created the school. You look at their website and the teachers only have first names. It's very obscure and mysterious. And I'm not real comfortable with that lack of transparency. And I certainly plan to learn more about this school going forward. So
Okay,
I don't have a good answer for you.
thank you. Excellent. And by the way, all of you members of the collaborative, if you want to come back on, let me know. Barry Pyatt, I see you're on the call. If you have something you'd like to ask or comment about, please do.
All right. Well, I guess my question would be, first of all, thank you for being with us. My question would be, what do you know about his record of veracity? We knew, for example, that Donald Trump was a pathological liar before he ever entered into the White House. And I'm a little skeptical about some of the positions Mr. Lane has taken. And I'm curious if you think he might be one of those candidates who's likely to say whatever it takes to get elected. Cleaning up our water is certainly one of those issues. And then doesn't intend to do anything about it once he gets elected and plans to do something else.
Well, I'm just peer into his eyes and divine whether he's an honest person or not. Is beyond me. As a political reporter in Kansas State House, particularly during the legislative session, I am sure I get lied to my face every single day. And some of it is just flat out blatant lies. Some of it's lies of omission or misleading. I don't know whether he's an honest guy or not. Um, I try to take it on faith until these people are proven otherwise. And because he has no political record of his own, it's very difficult to judge.
Well, I mean, has he been caught in a lie publicly?
Not that I know of, and it's partly why I'm very interested in this school. I would very much like to know how innovative it is, how well it functions, how well it's received, and whether or not people think it's a big phony baloney school. I don't really know. But he was endorsed by the Maha people. And so, the no vax, he's going to crash any vaccination mandates in Iowa. That's suspicious. Why didn't Trump endorse him? It's also odd. And the big ag thing is just a huge issue. Corporate ownership of land. He wants some sort of public accounting of ownership, but he's very traditional in the Republican sense of ban on abortion. He doesn't like DEI in schools and things like that, and that kind of ideology is common, you would think. So I don't know how much he's going to drift back into those issues in this campaign. And as far as honesty, we're just going to have to do some fact checking. And my disadvantage is I've written one story about the guy. I've never met him. There's a lot of politicians in Kansas who I've interviewed, like the Senate president, for example, 100 times. And I have a sense of whether or not he's honest with his colleagues and honest with the media. But others like it, Republicans and Democrats. If you cover a state house, you get a sense of whether people are genuine or not. And I just really don't have any idea with Mr. Lane.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Barry. We're going to go to Bob Leonard, then Liz Garst, and then Bryce Oakley. Bob?
Yes, thanks for being here, Tim. I think your column was very important. It gave us an outside perspective, somebody from Kansas. I think it provided a baseline for some of us to work off of, so thank you for that.
Sure.
With respect to Lane's truthfulness or veracity, recent column by Phoebe Wall-Howard highlighted that Lane had said that he was on the medical device company before it was doing, just medical devices. And then when it moved to sex toys, that wasn't his lane. And so he, got out of it. He couldn't quite divest it. but Phoebe showed that there was a YouTube video about this sex toy on Pornhub a year before he left. So, and I don't think a lot of the media has covered that. And I think it was a very important piece by Phoebe. And now, just for me to go sort of way out there, to me, there's two things. He's being disingenuous about all the water stuff, the cancer stuff, the big ag stuff. But, the aspiring novelist in me that's never going to appear, I would put that his wife, former married to the Kochs, got her big prenup, got her big settlement, and sort of a Dallas style kind of thing. They're coming back to take down the Kochs because of bad feelings. So I don't know exactly, how that would play out, but that would be the most dramatic kind of thing, that he really believes this, and then there's the personal vengefulness in it as well. But
Talk
anyway,
about
thanks for
way
your
out
piece.
there.
Well,
Yeah.
Charles Koch would be the grandfather of some of those kids.
Yeah.
And it would just be, I would be shocked if they had the audacity to take on Koch. Koch is known in Kansas in some circles. If they're showering you with money, you love them as a politician. But if you're on the receiving end of the punishment that the Kochs can hand out there, they have strike the fear of God in people. The Kochs are a huge influence in Kansas, and I just don't know how familiar people are with them, and to some extent, a dirty name.
Okay, thanks. All right, Liz Garst, are you ready to join us here?
Sure. What is the state of water quality in Kansas, and what are the Kochs? How are they playing on that issue in Kansas?
So I'm trying to think about water policy and the Kochs, and I don't think they wade into it very much. I do know, they're producers of the chemicals that are the beginning of water quality problems when it leaches through the soil and gets into our rivers and streams and so forth. Nitrates seep into the western Kansas sandy soil and just migrate rapidly into the underground aquifers. And, around feedlots, those places are just toxic zones. So I have no trouble believing that there's infiltration issues. And when you grow as much corn and soybeans, right, in Iowa, I mean, don't you have around some of those mega cornfields have microclimates? I mean, I've read that somewhere. But that's just an incredible array of cropping up there, and you're going to have consequences of it. And they're a company that makes billions of dollars off of that industry. So I'm meandering, but I think nobody in their right mind would ever take on the Kochs, and so they just need to take their cash and run off to Iowa and win an election and build a political empire up there.
Interesting. Thanks, Liz. Bryce Oakley, and then I see Lyle Muller is on the call. He is also a member of the Iowa Writers Collaborative. We'll bring him on after Bryce, if you so choose. Lyle, go ahead, Bryce.
I want to know where he filed his tax returns. I'm thinking the Harold Hughes case back in 1982 election when he was disqualified. He was considering running for governor, but he had filed a Maryland income tax return within 2 years of being put on the ballot in Iowa in a primary, which occurs in the early spring. And he decided to withdraw when it was clear he was not a resident for 2 years in Iowa. I'd just like to know, some enterprising reporter needs to ask him publicly, where have you filed your Iowa income tax returns in the last 3 years? Because if he did it for 25 and 24, he may not even be eligible to be on the ballot. That's my question.
It's a great question. Good job. You should go put on your reporter hat. The way I curbside politics in Iowa, and I've been up there for some of the presidential stuff. It's been fascinating off and on. You can ask a candidate for president, stand there in a cafe and ask him a question. Surely you can do that. Somebody can just march up to Mr. Lahn and ask him about his tax returns. It's a great question.
Thank you, Bryce. Lyle, do you have a comment or question? Love to have you on the call.
Yeah, I do have a question, and it has more to do with sort of the nuts and bolts of the job that you do. Do you find yourself in a position that you not only are going to have to cover a Kansas gubernatorial race, which is going to be pretty interesting this year, given that you have to have a new governor, and the Iowa gubernatorial race, because there's this guy who's spending part of his time in Kansas and is causing a bit of controversy up here?
Well, my job is to cover Kansas, and my dalliance with Iowa better stay a dalliance, or first of all, I'm going to start stepping on people's toes up there, and they're fully capable of handling this campaign. But if I can do some stuff about Wichita, that's where I would come in, and I think that's possible because, it's really hard. I can't come up there and have boots on the ground and chase this guy around Iowa. So it's really not my race to handle. We there's things that we can do better down here in Kansas in terms of covering our own gubernatorial candidates. So don't expect me to be your Kansas guy in Iowa. God. So I don't mind adding a layer to the coverage from what I can do down here, but I better not get my fingers stuck in the mousetrap up there if I wandered around too much.
Yeah, you could go down a rabbit hole. Is the Zach Lahn story a big story in Kansas?
I don't think so, because nobody knows who is down here. It would become it became a more interesting story when he won the nomination, for example. And if he was elected governor, there would be a few people that take notice of that. But I think in large measure, he was very, very much under the radar down there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Lyle. And by the way, any other members of the collaborative want to come back in, let me know. Bob, now I'm going to go to you. And Dick Stoffer, you've had some good comments in the chat. If you'd like to come on after Bob, love to have you. Bob?
Yeah, Tim, thank you. This has really been interesting. I have a question about the governor's race in Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
There appears to be a front runner on the Dem side, Cindy Holscher. At least some polling I've seen would indicate that. Is there a front runner on the Republican side? And if there is, are you handicapping that race yet, or is it too early to tell who might emerge?
So let's start with the Democrat side. We have two Johnson County. That's the most urban, populous county next to Kansas City in Kansas. And there's two Johnson County senators running against each other. One of them's named Corson and been endorsed by Governor Laura Kelly, former Governor Kathleen Sebelius, both Democrats. And Cindy Holscher at some point pissed off the governor, so she didn't qualify for that endorsement. But Holscher's ran a very strong campaign. We're going to see what happens in August 4th, I think it is, because Holscher is she's not giving up. The Republican side, we had a big field, a former governor, the Senate president, the Secretary of State, the State Insurance Commissioner, and a bunch of other people. And Donald Trump endorsed the Senate President, Ty Masterson, and immediately Jeff Collier quit. And he's the former governor. He replaced Governor Brownback when Brownback resigned to go work for Trump. And so, and he had been in the legislature before, a surgeon, really interesting guy. But he quit so quietly and didn't formally file. And there's been much speculation since then that U.S. Senator Roger Marshall, quite unpopular Republican from Kansas, might win the primary, might even win the election and bail and work for Donald Trump too. And that would create a situation in which Jeff Collier would suddenly be available to take that Senate seat, and at the same time, you have left the path more clear for Ty Masterson to win the governor's race. So it could be like a triple play. You get Marshall. He's been trying to get a job in the Trump administration for 2 years. And they changed Kansas law because of this. The numbers are so tight in the U.S. Senate that if he left, a Democratic governor could have appointed a Democrat to the United States Senate and changed the math up there. And so they passed a special law that says if Marshall quit right now, Laura Kelly would have to choose between 3 nominees submitted to her by the Republican supermajority House and Senate legislature. And so you have to assume that Jeff Collier's name would be on that list if such a thing happened. And so Marshall would get what he wanted. Jeff Collier would be a big shot in the U.S. Senate, and Ty Masterson would take over as governor. Triple play.
Wow.
Wow.
Thank you. That's
That-
pretty wild.
Oh, thank you. Barry, you have something else? And then Dick, we're going to go to you. Barry?
Yeah, I think if I were Rob Sands' campaign, I'd be thinking about running against Lane as I'd be running against the Koch organization. I mean, create them as one, or let's talk about them as one and the same. And so I'm curious about what has been their impact on Kansas.
The Koch Industries itself?
Yeah.
They send lobbyists into the Capitol to lobby for specific legislation. Koch Industries has been for 20 years one of the major donors to legislators, conservative legislative candidates, and you know, these members of Congress, when the phone rings and it says Koch caller ID, you're going to have the congressman answer the phone. This is the power they have in Kansas. They can elect you or not elect you, and they have a lot of sway over public policy. So
and that's what I'm asking about, is what kind of policies have they insisted upon and gotten because of their power in Kansas?
Yeah, I think they convinced Brownback to try to shrink government. So that whole effort to shrink government, which exists elsewhere, is something that the Koch people would push. Let's lower the corporate income tax. One of the things that happened was Brownback got in trouble, but when he cut income taxes, he created a system where businesses could organize LLCs and pass all their income through the LLC and pay no income tax. So businesses, I'm led to believe, somebody worked at Koch. Koch brought all these LLCs back into Kansas so they could funnel all their income through them and not pay any state income tax on that. And so they have persuasion, and some of it is hard to track. They give money away, but when you give a candidate $1,000, are you buying the candidate? I just think you make those re-elections easier for people. So whenever Koch calls, those politicians take the call and take it seriously, because they know that their re-election is going to be easier with that Koch money and all the money that follows the Koch money. When the Koch money puts it, then it's the Kansas Chamber and all these other organizations rally around and throw money their way too. So they're a huge influence in Kansas, and they've tried to, they've given away millions and millions of dollars to national Republicans. I think Koch got sideways with Donald Trump at some point in the presidential race in the past.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you so much, Barry. Let's see. Dick Stoffer, reader, subscriber, welcome to the call.
Thank you. Thank you. Tim, I used to spend some time in Kansas, so I'm a little familiar with where you're working. Talk about the ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. That is a Koch organization as well, isn't it?
I'm sure the Kochs love ALEC, and so the current Senate president, the likely Republican nominee for governor in Kansas, just finished a one-year term as the chair, or whatever the title is, of ALEC. So there's nothing going on in the Kansas Senate that wasn't rubber stamped by ALEC. I felt like ALEC writes model legislation that's thrown around in all kinds of states, and you could look at a book on ALEC's model legislation, and then here are 6 bills rolling around in Kansas that are very similar to that. So there was very little that was going to happen in Kansas that ALEC didn't like particularly during that period. But those conservative ideas aligned with Ty Masterson anyway. So there's a bunch of legislators that annually go to the ALEC conferences and come back, and committee chairmen, and they show up in Kansas. And then next thing you know, a month into the session, here's an ALEC bill being heard in a committee. So they have huge influence in Kansas, and I'm sure other states as well, just because in part legislators are too lazy to write their own bills. And they just go see this great idea about returning to the gold standard. I'm just making that up. And they throw it out there. And the next thing you know, the House Chair Financial Affairs Committee chairman is having a hearing on the gold standard. So some of them, a lot of politicians are lazy. They don't read bills. They don't want to write their own bills. They want lobbyists to write their bills. So nothing wrong with ALEC writing their bills as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dick. So, Mary, you had a comment in the chat worth bringing to the conversation. You ready to roll? You'll need to unmute. Go for it. Okay. Can you do that?
Yeah.
There we go.
Which comment?
Well, I thought your anti-tariff comment was, all of your comments are always good. So
Koch's, okay, there was the Egyptian fertilizer outfit that went to Weaver, Iowa, which is a very, very tip of Iowa. It's south of Montrose. And they built this huge fertilizer plant. And everybody was, oh, this is great, blah, blah, blah. Well, then something happens and Koch brothers, or Koch now owns that. And I believe that the forces in Iowa embrace that. And so they're very active in AFP. I mean, they submit letters to the Gazette. I actually, when I was unemployed, I'll tell you this. In my unemployed time, you had to submit 2 applications per week. And so I applied to a lot of places, the White House under Trump, AFP. I did lots of, there were some legitimate ones, but I got interviewed by AFP and they wanted to hire me. And then I just said, well, I don't think I can do this. So anyway, being unemployed, you get kind of goofy. And I survived. But I just think the Kochs are here. And as far as ALEC, I mean, I agree with you, Tim. You can just read. There were people in Iowa that I used to think were pretty decent legislators. Well, then they were all bigwigs in ALEC, and I'm like, I'm done with you people. One was a nurse, Linda something. I can't remember her name. She's from Cerro Gordo County, I think. But, I just felt like that's corrupted the whole legislative process. And I'm sure the Koch brothers love that with their model legislation. So anyway, Tim, I've enjoyed your comments. And I was amazed that you got a Democratic female governor. I was really shocked when that happened.
Kansas has historically gone Republican, Democrat for 30 years. And they won't elect, they haven't elected a Republican in the United States Senate in a century. But there's something different about the governor's office. They let the Republican, no matter who it is, run off to Washington and screw things up, but they care a hell of a lot more about who's governor. And this is a heavy Republican state in terms of voter registration. Right. If the Republican nominee gives the people a reason to vote against them, Democrats will get elected. And so, for example, Laura Kelly won her first campaign against Chris Kobach, a name you might have heard, huge anti-immigrant guy and all this stuff, voting irregularities. We found out he was the most well-known politician in Kansas and the most hated. And so he had a ceiling of about 47%, and Laura Kelly won. And that's how we end up with a Democrat. And then she had the Democratic advantage of incumbency and so forth, and seemed very reasonable, very moderate, and very much a centrist. It's exactly what she said she was going to be. So Brownback was really kind of an outlier in that he was probably the most conservative governor in Kansas modern history. And his biggest political mistake in his life was leaving the United States Senate, a job for life, to run for governor and find out just how tough of a job it is. Being governor is way harder than being in Congress, way harder. Because the buck stops with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's another member of the Iowa Writers Collaborative on the call by the name of Richard Gilbert. If you would like to have a comment in this conversation, I'd love to have you. You'll need to turn your microphone on while you figure that out. Tim, is there anything that really surprised you when you started looking into Zach Lane?
Oh, just the reason I did the story is because lo and behold, here's a competitive candidate for governor of a nearby state who really spent the last half a dozen years of his life in Kansas. I was just kind of like, I was puzzled why nobody had written more about it, particularly in Kansas. Why didn't that, why didn't anybody hear about there's a big newspaper in Wichita. They could have done something about it. They didn't have to write a big old fat story about it, but the Register wrote about Lane's flights back and forth, questioning how much time he was really spending in Iowa. And wouldn't we all like to have our personal, I don't know if it's a twin engine aircraft, but zipping around? He said he can be anywhere in Iowa in 30 minutes. And I think his flying days are going to be over, at least officially, if he gets elected governor. There's no way that the security services in Iowa are going to let him fly around like that for business. I wouldn't think.
All right, Richard Gilbert.
Yes, Tim, I especially liked your comments about how the degree of difficulty of being a governor versus being in the Senate, and actually have had appearance for a governor and a senator telling me that. Years ago, I worked for Bob Ray, and as he was being touted as the next real Senate timber, when in fact the governor liked being governor, he and I flew to Washington on commercial airlines, coach seats, to spend a day with Harold Hughes, who had announced that he was not going to run again. And while the governor was in talking to Harold Hughes, I was talking to Dwight Jensen, who was his aide in that time in the Iowa United States Senate, who told me this. He said, a U.S. senator, has a staff of about 30 people, maybe more, whose job is to make him look good. A governor has a employee base of about 30,000 people, any one of whom can make him look bad on any given day. Yeah. I've never forgotten that. But Tim, I think that's kind of reinforces what you're saying about the difference between Senate and governors. My experience with Kansas governors goes clear back to Bob Docking.
Goodness.
And there's probably a whole lot of apocrypha about Governor Docking, but one thing is true about this man. He did like a touch of the grape.
Oh,
yeah.
Goodness. Okay.
And despite that, Bob Ray, my boss, was a teetotaler, but was still very fond of Bob Docking.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for being here today, Tim. It's enlightening, and I look forward to a real in-depth piece about our subject today.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, I hope so. I'm sort of dog paddling down here. There's so much to write and so much to do. There's this, and we have, as you well know, fewer reporters running around in Kansas and Iowa than there used to be, and so I'm just more agonized over politicians getting away with stuff than I ever were before. I could always rely on the Kansas City Star to get that good story, and then I'd work on something different, and collectively we'd sort of keep tabs on all the kooky ideas and actions that people are doing behind the scenes stuff. And it's become much harder when you have fewer and younger reporters and reporters who are scared of pissing off political leadership. And, I've been in the State House for 20 years straight, and, the threats of I won't ever talk to you again, I just say that there are, as you well know, Senator, another 39 of you here in the building, and they got 125 members of the House. And, the Democrats would love to fill the vacuum you just created in my story.
Tim, I highly recommend you take a look at what we're doing here with the collaborative, because we have, as you heard, a lot of the people on the call are actual former journalists, or current journalists, but former legacy media journalists who've now come together in their own Substack platforms. Everybody's independent, but it's a fascinating model. We're still trying to figure it out. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. It's been fascinating, and look forward to future conversations.
Well, I appreciate your time, and I always enjoy sitting around gabbing about politics and waving my arms around, and then I run out of the building chasing another story.
All right.
Gets me motivated.
We'll let you go do that. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.